Rahman. I'm a lecturer at a public university in Kenya. I deliver lectures in computing and informatics. In our last lesson, we learned about the user-defined function, and basically we learned about the three important concepts. How do you declare and where do you declare a function? And how do you call up a function within a C program? And how do you define up a function? Today, we are going to extend that particular concept into answering a question, what are the types of user-defined function? And in that particular journey, we are going to discuss what are the classification or what are the types of the user-defined function and what are their syntax. And basically, we are also going to see how we can implement the same. So on that particular note, let's start and see how we can actually classify. We can actually classify user-defined function according to actually two criteria. One of the criteria, it is actually the number of argument or the argument. Do you have actually the arguments? We had seen that the argument, they are put up in an opening and closing curly bracket. So does a function contains an argument or not? That will be the first criteria. The second criteria, it is the return data type. Does the function returns a data type or not? So this will be the two criteria of our classification. So basically, we are going to classify them into four types, and we'll call them type 1 and type 1. Basically, when you're talking about type 1, basically they'll have no argument and no return data types. So no return data type. So that will be our type 1, actually, no argument and no return data type. And then we'll have the second one, which we'll call it type 2. And in our type 2, also we'll have no argument, but we'll have actually the return data type. And then we'll have our type 3. Our type 3, they'll have some argument and actually they'll have no return data type. So that will be our classification of type 3 of user defined functions. And the type 4 will have argument and also will have the return data type. So these are basically the classification according to these particular two concepts, that contain an argument or not to contain an argument, to contain a data type or not to contain a data type. So on that particular note, takes up to the syntax. How would you write up actually the type 1? So type 1, basically this is how we'll be to write. So if there's no argument and no return data type, so no return data type, we'll call it void. And then here we'll have up our function name, and then here we'll have opening and closing bracket. Inside we'll have got nothing. So basically that will be the syntax of type 1. The syntax of type 2, basically we are talking about must have a return data type. So here you can have a data type, maybe like int, and then our function name, and then there'll be no argument. So there is no argument, opening and closing curly bracket. Here we are going to have the body of a function. So here you're going to have our body of the function. Then when you come up to type 3, basically we are talking about must have an argument but no return data type. So no return data type, we're talking about void, and then our function name, and here you should have something like int x return data type, and opening closing curly bracket, and then you have our body. And the last one, we are saying it has got both argument and return data type. So here you'll have maybe int function and then int x. So we'll have supposed to return up integer, is also to take up integer, and then we'll have our body, and then we'll finish up. So basically this will be the syntax. Now for the last part of it, for implementation, basically we are going to see one of these 4 data types, going to implement and see how it runs in dev C++. So our implementation, basically we are going to have to write up a very simple message, and this particular message basically will be to tell us people that hello world, I'm creating functions. So basically, but we are going to use a function. So basically that's what we are going to do. And let's go to dev C++. In our last lesson we have seen that we have to initialize. So here we are initializing, so we are calling it up a void, doesn't return any data type, and then the function name, I'll call it message, and then there will be no data type, no argument, so there will be no argument which is taken up. And then basically I come inside the main method, I'm calling up a message. We have seen it, just writing up the name and the opening and closing bracket. That is how we call up our function. So here we are calling up our function. Now we want to define up our function. Our function is of data type void message. It doesn't take up any argument, and then we have our opening and closing curly bracket, and then we're going to have our body. Our body will be a very simple one. Just write up a printf, writing up a message, hello world, hello world, I'm creating functions. So basically all statement must end up with a semicolon, so we'll have up a semicolon. So we run this particular program and see up our results. So when we run this particular program, basically this is what we see. Hello world, I'm creating functions, and that is the end of this particular lesson. Basically we had classified, we had shown the syntax and how we implement it. So don't forget to subscribe into our next lesson, and basically we'll take up the type 1 user defined function into more details. Thank you.